Hi guys, Josh here. Welcome to FramesPerSecond. Today we're pushing Ektar 100 to 400 and we'll be doing it on my Fuji GW690iii. And so yeah, this is a video that I kind of shot before on 35mm, but the shots did not turn out well. I was using a viewfinder camera, and so most of the shots are either out of focus or have a lot of motion blur to it. So I thought we'd do it again, but I only had 120, so we're going to do some big 6x9 negatives. But yeah, hope you enjoy it. I'll still show some of the 35mm photos because they kind of do show the color shift and saturation you kind of get from pushing it, but we're going to do that today, so why don't we get right to it. Okay, so our first stop was La Costa Motel, which is kind of this vintagey looking motel kind of place, and there was some nice colors, so I thought it would be a good place to take some photos of. And so shooting 6.9, so it's very high quality, and so I feel like with the pushing, obviously you're losing shadow detail because of the added contrast, but I thought the colors were a bit more vivid and saturated than Ektar already is. Like, obviously Ektar's a very saturated film, but it just brought a bit more out of it, I feel, at least in my opinion. Though of course the shadows did lose a bit of their quality. Here's not too bad because I actually made it alright, but there was also a touch of a magenta tinge, and I'm not sure how much of that was the scanning versus how much of that is the color shift, because that does happen with pushing a bit of the time. But the vibrancy of the color just has a different quality to it. Now, Ektar doesn't always do the best greens, especially natural greens like there. And I'm not too sure why that is, but yeah, you really need to expose for the greens if you do want anything nice out of that. I actually was metering at 200 and then pushing it so that it would be at 400, so that was kind of to get a bit more detail out of the shadows because Ektar already isn't great with that. Even though there's some motion, that ball kind of is in focus, and that was kind of where I was aiming for. Here, obviously, the shadow detail is really dead in the background, which happens because obviously I wasn't exposing for the shadows of the trees. But yeah, when you underexpose greens on Ektar, it really does look ugly. So I do tend to try to like meter for the shadows or overexpose it to stop just to get a bit more out of it. I like it quite a bit, and I think it's something I will play around with a bit more because I obviously do love my colors. The added vibrance obviously of Ektar, but also of the pushing, I feel it is something that I do want to get more out of, and because I wish there was like a high speed film that was as saturated as Ektar. This is definitely my favorite shot of the roll. It almost looks like I'm in a completely different country. But the blues look nice, the greens aren't totally messed up, and that kind of dead grass in the foreground is really vibrant. But yeah, there's a lot of nice stuff in this shot, and just the way the light's kind of reflecting on the water is really nice as well, and it's just the exposure is pretty solid all around. Obviously I probably wouldn't try pushing it to 800 because I feel like the colors would probably shift quite weirdly, but 2 stops isn't too bad. And here was this ice cream truck. I didn't really grab any footage of it, but the colors did turn out quite nicely. As you can see here, the shadows are kind of messed up, but also very magenta. And then here's the last shot of this roll. I aim to focus on this little raft thing here, so it's not as sharp in the background, but you still do get all those nice colors from what everyone's wearing. But obviously, like, I wish I could have been closer from that kind of vantage point, but I was on a bridge, so I physically couldn't go any closer. Here's my shots on 35, which unfortunately aren't in focus or do have a fair bit of motion blur because the camera I was using is very small, and when you hit the shutter I was probably pressing a bit too hard, so there was a fair bit of motion, but also I just wasn't judging distances correctly the whole time. And I was trying to shoot a bit too quick, but yeah, the yellows pop out nicely, the blues, reds. But yeah, the lens on this did kind of flare a bit because it was a bit wider, so that's something to pay attention to next time. Unfortunately, this is the only shot that wasn't focused on this roll, and of course there's a giant flare kind of messing up. It's really nice, kind of candid moment. Yeah, I recommend pushing Ektar. I think you can get some interesting stuff and more vibrant shots at a higher speed and obviously in lower light. It's definitely worth a go. Obviously expect more contrast, but I love the saturation, how it popped even just a bit more than it already does. So I think it's definitely worth the experiment, especially if you want more colors, because Portrait and Pro 400H is just a bit too pastel-y for me sometimes. I do want more of that punch, and of course you can kind of add that in post, but I thought this was kind of a fun little experiment, and it's something that I might try again in the future. So that's all the time we have for today. Let me know your thoughts on the images and the camera in the comments below. Feel free to like and subscribe, turn those post notifications so you know when there's a new episode. Anyway, I'm Josh. It's been frames per second. Just get out there, shoot some film.